Hello, everyone. We are live, I believe. Hi, I'm Isabelle Roughol, and I am joined today by Lauren. Hi, Lauren. How are you?
Hi, Isabel. I'm doing very well, thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, this is so much more fun to be doing this with company rather than on my own. I find this so much better than a monologue. Introduce yourself to get us going, I guess.
Yeah, so my name is Lauren Razavi, and I'm a writer and activist. I'm currently writing a book about digital nomads, which is called Global Natives, and that's coming out in September. And I'm a tech policy fellow at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, looking at remote work and the future of citizenship.
Yeah, congratulations on that. I thought that was a recent announcement. That's really cool, and I look forward to reading the book and definitely having you on the podcast when that comes out. And I mean, if you're following me on LinkedIn, on YouTube, you kind of already know who I am. But I'm Isabelle Roughol. I am the founder, host, producer, one woman behind the one woman show that is Borderline, which is a podcast, a newsletter, a community, a media for defiant global citizens covering kind of lives lived across borders. And I was, in my previous life, the international editor at LinkedIn on this very platform. Hence, being here quite a bit and having this experience of managing a remote team. And so as I was saying in the post announcing this, the two of us together have like a couple decades of experience of doing all the things people have been doing during the pandemic, working remotely and on Zoom and all of that, and around across time zones and borders. So that's what we're going to get into today. Let's start by defining some terms, and I want to say hello to everyone. I can't even keep up with the chat, but I love seeing everyone mentioning the country that they're from, like Turkey, Pakistan. That's awesome. So hello, everyone. By the way, we'll be taking questions, so like drop them in the stream. We'll absolutely be answering them. Cameroon, Bangladesh is so cool. So yeah,
Super borderless, right?
Sorry?
Super borderless crowd we have with us.
I know. Somaliland, man, that's cool. That's like one of those like countries that are countries. There's a whole documentary about that. Is really fascinating, places that don't exist. All right, so Danielle, I love these seeing these followers come back. All right, so let's get into our topic. Let's define some terms. What do we mean? You're the one that taught me the difference between remote and distributed, and now there's a new word, hybrid, that's everywhere. Can you define what those are?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of think to put the human face on this, it probably makes sense to talk about how my experience and your experience is a little bit different. So you were working for LinkedIn and kind of building this international team and very much working in the remote context. But if I'm correct, like you had colleagues in offices around the world, right?
Yes. So often editors would be kind of alone as an editor in that office, but there were other functions around. So they weren't working, from home or from, the company was present and had an office and all of that. But then our boss was in New York and the bulk of the organization was in the United States.
Cool. So yeah, for me, when I was a managing editor for Google, and I did a couple of other roles for Google kind of over the years, but I was working as part of a distributed team. And essentially, I think the difference is really in to be remote, you have to be remote from something. Whereas distributed is just kind of like remote by design, if you like. It's distributed by design. So the team that I was running and the teams that I've worked as part of in tech have been fully distributed. So there was no kind of like manager sitting in the office, sort of not located with the remote workers, but instead the entire team was completely distributed. So everybody was working from home or from their own co-working space. So I think this is a sort of an interesting thing for us to think about now, because there's been a lot of talk this past year about remote work for obvious reasons. But actually, the move that I think businesses need to be making is towards more distributed structures, meaning that you're sort of designing for the people who aren't in the room every single time you kind of make a decision or do something. And now, with things sort of beginning to reopen, etc., we have the rise of hybrid work, which is sort of part in the office and part remote. And I think we're going to dig into that a little bit and kind of like the do's and don'ts in our conversation today. But I think the biggest thing to be aware of is that remote first. Remote suggests being remote from something. Distributed suggests that everyone's kind of on equal footing, and that actually there perhaps isn't an office that people can gather in.
I'm sensing a bit of a preference in the way that you're describing it. Why do you think that distributed is better than remote, or do you? That's kind of what I'm getting, but
yeah, I definitely do, because I think remote is kind of this half step on the way to distributed. So we're kind of in this environment now where everybody is talking about remote work, but kind of not taking the conversation beyond that idea of not being located somewhere. Whereas if you think more about teams, if you think more about kind of redesigning and future-proofing businesses, it's really a distributed mindset you need to have. So in practice, that means making sure that you're kind of redesigning functions so that decisions aren't being made by like the 3 people who are in an office and then sort of being reported to the 20 people who are not in that office, who are remote workers. So we need to master asynchronous communication, i.e. not making decisions in a room together, but instead kind of communicating in a more thoughtful and intentional way. And it's really, really important to get really serious about documentation. So there are some great companies out there who are leaders in the remote world, like GitLab and Ghost and WordPress, who create extensive documentation and really document every decision and process, review that stuff and make it useful for every employee or entire teams within the organization. And in GitLab's case, a lot of their stuff is actually fully public, so anyone can access it and kind of gain from their knowledge of how to design a business in this way and how to work in this way.
Yeah, that's awesome. You're reminding me, there's a former colleague of mine, Brian Sue. I don't know if he's here, but I'll share his stuff. He does this great, like, he's a data guy, and he does these great like TikTok videos and videos on LinkedIn about what it's like to work. And he had a hilarious one the other day about like finding who's the owner on a particular project or product. And like that's really basic information, but I remember being so frustrated. It would take me like over a day of like emailing around and all of that to find out, because you're not like in the room with these people, so you can never know. You can't just go up to someone's desk and find that information. So documentation is so important. You reminded me also of a conversation that I feel like we didn't have enough, especially, when people started talking about how, the pandemic had revealed remote work. Everyone was going to like get back to that because it was so much better. And people talk about how it's so much better, for working parents or for people who are disabled and maybe cannot, access the office as easily. The thing that bothered me with that, and it gets to what you're talking about, remote versus distributed, is if you're just remote, you're also remote from the centers of power. And so by we're pretending that we're making work more accessible, but actually we're still marginalizing people who can't be there physically in the room with the decision makers, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Like, so much of designing for this new world of work is really about questioning hierarchy and reassessing where power lies. I think we've seen a huge pushback, actually, to a bigger extent than I was expecting, from workers who want remote, who want flexibility, who are sort of, I guess, like renegotiating the kind of standard contract or the standard terms of what it means to be an employee. And I think that's really important. I think that there are a lot of managers who perhaps want people back in the office because they're not quite sure how to be a manager in a remote context, and it would be easier to just kind of get everyone back where they can see them. Yeah. But actually, I think like the whole like negotiation of work has changed. And we're seeing all over the US right now, people quitting their jobs because they're not happy with how their companies are kind of transitioning or sort of adjusting to this new world. I think we're going to keep seeing that. I do think that there's been quite a big power shift over the past year from companies setting the tone and setting all the rules to individuals now. It's kind of up to you, like what you can, like what you want to get out of work, how you want it to fit in with the rest of your life. And I guess I'm completely biased on this because as somebody who's been a remote worker for such a long time and a digital nomad, I really believe that people should be able to sort of have the freedom to define their own lives, and that work should fit into that rather than be the kind of leading force that defines absolutely everything else that you're able to do.
It's funny. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I feel like the pandemic has just been like this kind of like watershed where a lot of things that were brewing, were just accelerated, which is true in a lot of areas. But it's funny because it's a decision that I made just before the pandemic, for myself to leave a corporate job and kind of figure things out on my own. And so many people now are coming to me being like, "Oh, how did you do this? Like, why?" Give me some pointers and everything. And you're talking about the difficulty of managing remotely. Hit me up because I did that for years with hiring and managing. I think we'll do another just on that, another live, because there are many tips and tricks doing that. But I think a fundamental one is trust. Like the old world of work, if you're still thinking I'm a manager, therefore I'm the boss, and therefore I tell you what to do, that's never going to work in a distributed or remote or hybrid world, right? Like you got to empower the individual. You got to hire people that you can trust, that are smart and are going to do the right things, and you just got to let go of the illusion of control because you have none.
Totally. I actually said to a client recently, if you can't trust your workers to get the work done and kind of like handle their own hours, etc., then like the problem that you have is not really about getting people back to the office and working set hours. The problem you have is that you're not actually building trust with the people that you're employing. And I think that's really fundamental, because without trust, you get very, very toxic company culture. And I think that's applicable whether it's in an office or in a virtual environment.
Yeah, I'm loving what Amet is saying here. I'm learning how to make comments show up on the screen. This is really cool. So I think you're absolutely right, Amet. Like the human interaction, the human element is super important. I think where a lot of organizations are wrong is when they think, oh, we're just going to go distributed or remote to like save money. Because you're not you're not paying for real estate, you're not paying for an office, but you better have a really good travel budget. Like right now, obviously, it's not possible in a lot of places for a lot of reasons. But when I was building my global team, when I started out before I was a manager, we were a much smaller team, and my boss was in New York, and I was in Paris at the time, and I had a quarterly trip. Like that was part of the deal. I was in New York every 2-3 months because I had to, especially in the beginning when you don't really know people, I had to gel with them. And it's also like about motivation and inspiration. Every trip kind of charged me up for the next 3 months and like really motivated me, because it can be hard to be kind of isolated. And then when I built my own team, same, I did a lot of interviewing, hiring remotely, but I tried to go and visit the offices we would find like a central city that we could all join in. And then we would have yearly kind of offsite, like big, everyone, like 50 of us together, socializing, working, but also just getting to know each other as people. I think that's super important.
I totally agree. I think it's a bit of a nuance that's being missed in a lot of the conversation about the switch to remote right now. It's like, just because you may not have the same level of office space as before doesn't mean that there's no in-person interaction. It just sort of means that you have to reassess what the value and the purpose of those interactions are. So I think a really good example is the company Automatic, who founded WordPress. They're the creators behind WordPress.com. Those guys organize a grand meetup, I think is the language that they use, but they bring together all 1,500 of their employees who are based in something like 70 countries around the world. They bring them together in one place, and then that's a very sort of intensive in-person experience, a sort of company retreat, which obviously costs a lot of money, but also delivers a lot of value, because these team members are able to kind of come together in person, have a really like pleasant social time, whilst also kind of getting to know one another more professionally. And then when they kind of go away, when they go back to home or less kind of remote work environment, those relationships are a lot stronger. You're able to remember, sort of have these shared memories of that time at dinner or when somebody had too many glasses of wine. And I think that side of things is really, really important. And I'll just, I'm going to keep like cheerleading for GitLab because they truly are like doing everything right, I think. But those guys make available a fund so that members of their teams are able to basically go through a short process and then be able to be funded by the company to go visit a colleague in another city or another country. And things like that, I think companies can sometimes be a bit resistant to it because they envision absolutely everybody taking a trip every other week. But in practice, like, people don't want to travel all the time. They're probably just going to take a couple of trips per year. And that's, again, going to be really, really meaningful for sort of having that colleague relationship that I think a lot of people, which is completely understandable after the last year and a half, are seeing remote work as an incredibly isolating and lonely thing. Whereas I think that the kind of next stage, if we say we've done remote work during a pandemic, the next stage is going to be distributed work. And I think it's just a really, really exciting time to be an employee or to be running a team or running a business.
Yeah. Like what Margaret is saying, started remote, and after 6 months, I've only met 2 of my coworkers. One was in a parking lot. Man, I cannot imagine starting a gig remotely right now. Like, props to you, because that is really hard. And that's something that, when I was hiring remotely, the one thing that we always did is, like, week 1 is in person onboarding. I fly to them, they fly to me, we fly to somewhere in common to New York or whatever, but we are getting together, and that's really important. So starting remotely is hard, but I love what you're saying about, like, meeting someone in a parking lot. That's actually something I've noticed quite a few people doing during the pandemic. Is, the offices were closed, but you could still have several people, especially in big cities, from the company in the same city, and there's nothing stopping you meeting for a walk in the park or something like that. What I do like about not having to work in the office, and I know it's something that a lot of people are big fans of, is working in coffee shops, working in co-working spaces, working in I don't know if you experienced that when you were at Google. One thing that frustrated me working in tech is that it felt divorced from the community, because a lot of the people, and that's a whole other issue, but a lot of the people who work in tech kind of have the same backgrounds, the same age, the same interests. And so the chances that you're going to meet an older person, an immigrant, someone who works in a completely different field, end up being pretty low. And since you're working, like, all the time, and you're having your meals in the office as well because food is provided, you're in that bubble, and that disconnects you from your users, from your customers, from your community, from the people you're doing this work for in the first place, right?
Yeah, I have to say, my experience was pretty different, but that's probably because I was never in an office for Google. So I was working, first of all, like, my first contract for Google gave me a very strange impression of the world, because I was kind of fresh out of university. It was a project being run by 2, like, badass distributed women leaders within the company in different locations, and we were basically able to just collaborate in this distributed fashion. I guess this would have been like 2014, but we were able to kind of collaborate in this distributed fashion, which to me felt incredibly intuitive, and so we were kind of able to do that. And the team was very, very diverse and very, very international. Later on, when I was leading a team, I made a real conscious effort to be working with people across borders and across cultures, because I was running creative teams, and creativity definitely doesn't just remain within one nation's borders. So yeah, I think that for me, although I sort of heard from colleagues who've worked for the big tech companies about these kinds of experiences of really, like, living at the office, I would say that my experience was very, very different because I was a remote worker throughout that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I hate to be that person who's now going to complain about like the free gym and the free meals and everything. It was wonderful. The company was wonderful. The people I met there were wonderful. But there is that sense that, you know, after a while that you're in a bubble, really, and it's good to get out. Ahmet was making another good point, and then we have a question from Marcella. On young people kind of needing, I mean, he's talking about students, but you can, you know, kind of extend that as well to younger professionals needing the structure and the discipline of an office. And I also think about them like just needing to be able to absorb the codes of working life and the mentorship. Like, how do you get that as a really young worker, if you're not in the physical presence of other people, if you're just behind your screen?
I think it really comes down to whether the company that you're working for has, in fact, designed their distributed systems well, whether, in fact, you're going to get that structure and discipline that I think people just instinctively think comes from the office, but does not always, depending on like the company you're working for. But if it's a distributed company and they have the right processes in place, you will get exactly the same value that you would expect from the office in that way, of the structure, of the discipline, of kind of meeting people and learning the kind of ropes. I really don't think that changes in a virtual environment. I just think that it's really ground into us because previous generations had that experience that somehow, you know, the office water cooler is where all the best ideas come from. And I guess my response to that is like, there are an awful lot of water coolers on the internet, and you can be in your pajamas while you access them. But that's a very sort of remote first mentality. But in fact, I can't remember if I was recommending this to you the other day, Isabelle, but there's a book. I think it's called Managing Talent in the Networked Age, and it's like Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn is one of the authors of that book. And in it, they essentially argue that the future of careers is going to be more about the kind of networks you cultivate as an individual rather than about working for a particular company and sort of playing by that one company's rules. I really think that's true, and it really reflects my experience. Like, I've been a remote worker since 2010. I've been a digital nomad since 2013, and I have not at all struggled with not having a physical presence in an office for more than, you know, the occasional week, maybe every year or two. In fact, I've really been able to take advantage and I guess not get distracted by some of the distractions, the office politics, and just really kind of forge my own path. And I'd really encourage anyone who is worried about that, particularly younger people, to just stop kind of like thinking about the negatives and just start thinking about how you can embed yourself in communities and industries and things that you're really passionate and excited about. I think there's a huge opportunity for a more kind of bespoke, individual to you career in the future. And yeah, if your current company really sucks at remote work, like, choose another. A lot of people are doing that right now.
Yeah, and there are, you know, as you said, like your professional activity, networking, your learning doesn't have to be either within the company that employs you or that you work for. You know, there are professional events, there are networks, there are, you know, in London, I'm part of Hackers, which is a group for people who work kind of at the intersection of media and technology, which is my sweet spot. There are, you know, there's just a lot of different organizations that you can join and that you can have that physical interaction. You know, like what Khaled was saying, which is you know, that the socializing aspect can be challenging when you're working remotely. But yes, the comment is too long for the screen. But yes, you have Slack, you have activities, you have things that you can do in person for sure.
If I can just add something there, I think something that, you know, whether you're a new employee, an old employee, whether you're a manager, whether you're a boss, I really think that something everyone should be thinking about right now with their teams is designing rituals to kind of facilitate that social side. And now that sounds like it's just going to be absolutely terrible. But the reason that I'm actually saying it to everybody here is because I don't think those things work very well just as a top-down kind of thing, like the people who run the company telling you how it's going to work. I think a lot of it builds from the bottom. It's more like grassroots. And so, for example, arranging like a monthly town hall where everybody can kind of get together for an hour, and maybe there's some kind of structure, but the main idea is so that anyone can bring anything they're struggling with to the table on like a company level. Or organizing a couple of hours each week where you're doing co-working sprints via Zoom. So a bunch of you can log in together, someone does a bit of an introduction, and you just kind of work together, and you perhaps know what you're working on and kind of can collaborate live, a little bit like you might in the office. These kinds of things can just really, really help to actually build company culture in virtual environments. When I've worked on like loads of different projects, this is like really important if you aren't meeting in person, is to still kind of understand what your check-in points are and to have those more informal and kind of casual interactions day to day or week to week as well. So like rather than feeling bad if you notice something that's really not working, like really feel empowered to suggest something and perhaps run it, or sort of be the one who sets things up and then rotate running it amongst colleagues.
There was, you reminded me of one such ritual that I absolutely loved. It was in person, but it could absolutely work out remotely. And this was what Pulse, which was a startup that LinkedIn acquired back in, 2013, I think. And then when they first joined the company, I was at one of their all hands in San Francisco, and they had this tradition where kind of everyone could speak up and say, whatever there was on their mind. But it was, I like, I wish, I wonder. And it was like the sentence had to start by I like, or I wish, or I wonder. And it just like created this like kind of amazing brainstorm where people like, I like, this new product feature. I wonder why, we're not doing this, whatever. And I was so wonderful. And it, it's a simple ritual, but it just gives people like that framework to, rather than just say, hey, tell us what you think, which can be a little bit like,
Maybe just one more thing to add to that. Since I know we're both members of London Writers Salon, I think those guys are a really interesting example of sort of building remote or industry infrastructure actually outside the bounds of a company. So if I can say really, really briefly, essentially these awesome people who run London Writers Salon, Matt and Parul, when the whole world went into lockdown last year, they decided to kind of move, I think what were like monthly events online, and they started Writers Hour, which you can check out on writershour.com. And basically it's a free writing sprint at, I think it's 8 a.m. in like 4 different time zones every weekday. And it's grown so that there are hundreds of people who are attending these sessions every single day. And so this is kind of like, in my view, a writing community infrastructure. And it's really, really cool to just kind of have these things in a remote context that you can show up to and that you can kind of feel in community around. So I think the kind of takeaway, the reason that I bring this up as an example is because if it doesn't feel right to do that within your current team or your current company, as in come up with a ritual and start something, also look more widely actually at your industry and have a think about whether you could do something like Writers Hour for the marketing community or for the tech community. And really like, don't be afraid to experiment. Like we're in a playground of experimentation right now. Nobody knows what the hell they're doing, even those of us who've been remote working for a decade. So everything's up for grabs. Like go for it.
And it changes so quickly, right? Because the technology changes. And so what was, I started working remotely, like you, even before LinkedIn, I was working on a project between the Figaro and the New York Times. So, a newsroom in Paris and a newsroom in New York. That was in 2009. Oh my gosh, we weren't doing Zooms. And so, but still somehow we managed to work. So the technology is going to keep changing, and therefore the ways that we work are going to keep changing. We have tons of great questions coming in that I can't even keep up with. So we're going to go really kind of fire around really quickly. Lightning round, sorry. Marcella, who's who's a member of Borderline, so you can do like her and support the work at borderlinepod.com/subscribe. That was my plug. Any tips on how to fix remotely what was already broken in the office? Right. If you just take a dysfunctional team in the office and you just make it a home team, they're still dysfunctional. I think, and then I'm going to send it to you, Lauren, but I think one thing that's interesting is actually it's a great diagnostic tool. what was broken about your team? Was it because it was in the office and the office wasn't working? Or is it something else that, that remains when you're no longer in the office? Like, what was it that was broken? So, being able to kind of change the environment, that's kind of your variable in the experiment to kind of understand better what is going on. Lauren, do you have suggestions on this last question?
I totally agree with with your assessment there, Isabelle. I think maybe the only thing that I would add is that I truly think that some companies are like not, you cannot fix them, essentially. Like, I think that it really depends on the exact nature of the dysfunction, of course. But I wouldn't say that a team that was already dysfunctional in the office and is sort of trying to translate exactly what they were doing there into a virtual environment, I don't think there's going to be a change there. I do think there's an opportunity for employees and any team member really, but to just kind of like step forward and say, hey, can we have some honest conversations about what's working and what's not working? And maybe actually the turn to remote work gives you a bit more of an ability to do that, because it's like the reason to start the conversation, whereas perhaps a couple of years ago that wouldn't have been possible, because where is the space to kind of talk about the dysfunction?
Yeah, and you have your response there, Mattela, from Mikhailo as well. Suggesting, you need to understand the diversity of each of your team members. And that's something that maybe you weren't able to do in the office because there were too many people around and it could get awkward. But you can actually have a lot more one-on-one conversations and understand kind of where everybody's coming from when you do that remotely. And again, if you're in the same city, you can just go out for coffee. But if you're not, you can do that via Zoom and whatnot. I mean, we do everything on Zoom now. We do therapy on Zoom. We certainly can do one-on-one with a manager. In fact, I did for a long time. I'm going to take a couple more questions. Send your final questions in. I'm realizing we're already at half an hour, but there's so much good stuff here that I'm happy to continue unless you need to run, Lauren.
I've got a little more time.
All right, let's take a little bit more time. I like this question from Emmanuel because how can I present myself as a credible person if I'm to work from Ghana for someone abroad? I mean, your being from Ghana doesn't make you any less credible than anyone else. I mean, the beauty of remote distributed work is that you can do it from anywhere. Now, the challenge that you might find is like, even if some companies are increasingly, they're open to remote work, but they still want to hire in a country where they have a legal structure, where they have an office, where they have where they're incorporated, for tax reason, for social insurance, social benefits, everything kind of reason. So that might be the challenge. I know, Lauren, you were telling me the other day about some interesting innovations that are happening in that space.
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it brief, but essentially there are a lot of new startups popping up at the moment, which are targeting companies that want to recruit people from overseas and helping them make sure that they are contracting with people as freelancers in a completely compliant way. So this intermediary platform. For an example, I think one that I've come across is HeyPortal.io, HEY portal.io. That's just one example. There are many of them now, but essentially these companies are popping up so that they are able to sort of be the intermediary step between people like Emmanuel and perhaps like a European or an American company who want to be able to work with him, but actually don't want to set up a local office. This kind of stuff basically makes it so that a company can sort of run a global payroll of freelancers and be able to kind of comply with all of the local regulations in whichever country somebody is in. One thing that I would say on just a really practical level is be really, really careful with American job applications in particular, because a lot of them ask you for lots and lots of information, lots and lots of time and energy, and then don't even state anywhere that they're only open to US citizens. I've actually been caught out with that with a major media organization before. So I always want to warn people against it. Like, there's nothing wrong with like getting on the phone or sending an email to just try and clarify before you send in an application.
Yeah, I had a friend who like just kind of went through the whole process and was like, "Hey, by the way, I don't have the visa that you're gonna need. Like, are you gonna sponsor me?" Went through the whole process, and like at the very end, they were like, "Oh, we can't make this work, legally." And often that's because the hiring managers, they want who they want for their team, for their project. They think your skills are amazing. They have no idea how immigration works. If they're not immigrants themselves, they've never encountered it. They have no idea how complex and restrictive it is, the way that we understand. And so they just want to go for what they want to go for. And like at the very end of the process, when HR is drawing up the papers, they're like, "Oh, never mind." So yeah, pick up the phone, because you don't want to waste your time. Like, your time is precious. Your job searching time is precious. If anyone thinks you're not credible coming from Ghana, oh my God, you do not want to work for them. Like, that sounds dreadful. All right, I'm gonna like go through real quick. This is a great comment, which is too long for the screen, but check out the comment stream, because there's some great stuff coming up. I'm just trying to pull out the questions. There's a question. I see a question mark. I bring it up. How are people managing their teams back to the office? That's the whole point. We don't want them back to the office, do we?
And so the second part of the question, are they investing in remote software with COVID in mind too? So I do think that a lot of companies have sort of already made that shift in terms of like, if your company didn't have a Zoom subscription in March 2020 or April 2020, they probably got one. I think we're going to see a lot of that stuff stick around. And that does open up new opportunities, even if some people do go back to an office to work in new ways, to work with a broader kind of cross-section of people, perhaps globally. But yeah, I think that in my view, like getting the teams back to the office, i.e. literally trying to go back to what things were like in 2019, doesn't make a lot of business sense. Like, it's probably not going to get the best out of your teams. It's probably not like the best approach if you want to kind of retain your talented workers and make sure that they're happy and make sure that you are competitive in this new realm.
One solution that we haven't really talked about all that much is hybrid, right? So you're partly back in the office, partly not. I'm a little skeptical on that, because if it's another, what company was it? Some big tech Silicon Valley company that was like, "Oh, people are going to come back on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday." I'm like, how is that any more flexible? You're still putting a kind of a rigid structure in place that does not take into account people's kind of personal situation. So yeah, you have to be in the office less, but you're still restricted in a way that a lot of people are just not really willing to do. Like, we don't have the whistle at the top of the factory telling us when to come in anymore. Like, that's old school.
Yeah, I think it sort of it opens the door for there to be quite a big problem in terms of presenteeism as well, because if you're working 2 or 3 days a week at the office, then you may well find that the managers who really wanted you to come back to the office are actually quite insistent that you're like staying until you've finished your work on those days. Like, I'm hearing kind of stories from different friends around the world of kind of being told they need to work from the office for 2 days a week, and that ends up being 2 12-hour days in the office, and then the rest of the time a sort of normal working day from home. And that is hybrid failure. Like, that is the polar opposite of what a successful hybrid work model looks like. And yeah, I think it's really important that employees, team members are in fact like holding their companies to account on that, because it is going to just kind of breed a toxic culture. It's going to make it a much worse human experience to work for that company. And even if you decide that if you're not going to stand for it, I think we all kind of have this obligation to educate companies on what it is that we want as individual humans right now. And there's definitely an opportunity for that on companies that are misstepping in terms of that return to the office.
And that's true too when you're working from home, or you're working from co-working space, whatever, but especially if you're working from home, which is the day stretches and stretches, because you wake up, you're right at your computer, you don't really have that commute, whatever. So and it's easy to just not have that disconnect from work to home, because often that's literally like sitting on a different side of the couch or something like so it is definitely, something to keep in mind. I think we're all still, both managers, employees, self-employed as well. That's certainly my experience at the moment. We're all kind of figuring out where the boundaries are. I like the idea that, I know it's something you talk about a lot. It like, forget work-life balance. It's more about like harmony and how do the two kind of fit together. But that's often used as an excuse to just be like, oh, sure, I can work at 11 p.m. because I took a break at 2 p.m. to pick up my kids or go to the gym. Like, it's not kind of where I want to go. I realize we're at 40 minutes. I think we're going to close it for today. Anything else that you wanna touch on, Lauren?
I think I just want to respond to Mikhail's question, which
yeah,
how many hours a week will be ideal in the hybrid workspace? Because this is actually a really important point about distributed work, is that we should stop thinking about work in terms of time and instead think about output. So what are the goals that you need to achieve and how quickly, not how many hours are you going to work. How many hours you work is an input, and what you actually get done is the output. And a lot of asynchronous communicators, a lot of distributed companies are actually really, really bullish on having no interest in the number of hours that you're spending. I.e., if you're being paid for 40 hours a week, but you're getting your work done perfectly in 10, that's fine for them, and they're not going to argue with it. I think that's just a kind of useful framing. The final thing that I'd just like to say is I'm very bad at self-promotion, but I have a newsletter. If you'd like to keep in touch, anybody, you'll find me at LRAZ, that's LRAZ, or Z for the Americans, .substack.com. That's totally free of charge, so please feel free to sign up and drop me an email sometime and reply if you fancy a chat.
Absolutely. It is a great newsletter. I read it every week. So strong recommend. And to your point, one kind of final point I wanted to make as well is I'm aware that a lot of the conversation we're having is around professional kind of jobs, which can be more self-guided, which where you have a little bit more freedom than some of the more hourly job, which again are hour based. Two things on that. One, I saw that LinkedIn recently put out some research around kind of the fastest growing remote work in the United States, I think it was, but it applies really everywhere. And it's not all it's not all professional desk based. It's there's a lot of other things. The other, when you were pointing out, not doing by the hour, reminded me, there's been the system has been for decades in Marseille in the south of France with waste collection. So that the garbage collectors are paid not by the hour, but by when is the garbage collected. And if you can do it in 10 hours, like, why we're just going to leave you on your truck for another 12, like, just so you've put in the hours? That's ridiculous. Now, with that, unfortunately in Marseille, that's often meant that the job is half-assed because then they could get out early. So there is that question of quality control. But if you fix that, then it's absolutely something that can be done. It just reminded me of. I'm also terrible at self-promotion, but I'm going to do it anyway. My work is at borderlinepod.com. You can find the podcast, which just had a great episode, if I must say so myself, come out yesterday, which I love. There's a newsletter that you can subscribe to. A lot of it is free. You can support it with a paid membership. Actually, a lot of it is free. And I hope you'll join us there. There's a community of global citizens talking about work and life and immigration and all these things that happen in the spaces between countries and cultures where a lot of us live now, including the two of us. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. We're going to sign off. We'll be back. We'll be back next week, same time. We're going to keep doing this throughout the summer, minus a few weeks where we'll be on holiday. But we'll keep talking about working across borders. So stay tuned for the next one.
And feel free to get in touch with us if there's something in particular you'd like to hear us talk about, because we're very happy to do that.
Totally. Drop it in the comments. My email is isa@borderlinepod.com. Get in touch.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.